Shana Tova from Sinai Synagogue and Gamar Chatima Tova. May we all be sealed in the book of life for at least another year of health and goodness. On Rosh Hashanah, I spoke about Lizzie and my excitement at the prospect of becoming grandparents. And like many Jewish parents and grandparents, it won't be long before I too am acting like the Jewish mother who was walking down the street pushing her two young children in a stroller. A passerby stopped her and said, "Your children are adorable. How old are they?" To which the Jewish mother replied, "The doctor is 3 and the professor is 2. Now, what can we say? Modesty and humility are not highest on the list of common Jewish traits, especially when it comes to descendants or even ancestors. So it's quite illuminating to read the wording of the introduction to the Ashamnu prayer, in which we list our sins alphabetically. Our God and God of our ancestors, hear our prayer. Do not ignore our plea. Our God and God of our ancestors, we are neither so arrogant nor so stubborn as to claim in your presence that we are righteous and have not sinned, for indeed we and our ancestors have sinned." The wording of this passage is quite clumsy. We are not so arrogant nor stubborn to say we are righteous and have not sinned, for we have. Why not just say directly, we've sinned, and now acknowledge this publicly? Why state the negative only to refute it? In fact, our liturgy is quite aware that we are just arrogant enough to insist that our sins are not really a big deal, that our transgressions are so insignificant that there is no need to dwell on them. And thus the liturgy undercuts that assertion by demanding that we admit reality and insist we will not make the claim that we are in any way righteous, because we have sinned and we do sin. Our current prayer book does not include the line, "we and our ancestors have sinned." But the new conservative movement, Machzor, returned the phrase, "and our ancestors," which is found in much earlier Machzorim. Why? Why insist on including our ancestors with us as sinners? Perhaps by declaring that our ancestors have sinned, it assures us that in our weakness to fulfill the mitzvot, we are no worse than those who came before us. That the nostalgia for a golden past is just that, a gilded image that is not reality. Our ancestors did not set such a high standard of piety that we cannot hope to achieve tshuva. But if we take the entirety of the Yom Kippur liturgy, the addition of our ancestors to our confession is appropriate. On Yom Kippur, we are tasked not only to work through the tshuva process for our transgressions, but also for others, specifically our ancestors. Even though they may no longer be with us, there is still atonement to be carried out. A midrash teaches that the dead also need atonement. That appears to be the reason we recite Yizkor on Yom Kippur and not Rosh Hashanah, for Yizkor prayers are recited on every other festival. Rabbi Jeffrey Cohen, in his description of the Yom Kippur liturgy, wrote that it was not in the context of the liturgical ritual of Yom Kippur that the very practice of reciting a memorial prayer for the departed first arose. Rabbi Moses Isserles, the leading rabbi of Ashkenazic communities in the 17th century, explained, we recite the names of the departed souls since they also obtain forgiveness on the Day of Atonement. An earlier authority, Rabbi Jacob Weil, explained that the holiday is referred to as Yom Kippurim in the plural, for the day atones both for the living and the dead. To see Yom Kippur in this way suggests that we are responsible not only for our mistakes and sins, but our ancestors as well. Now, this shouldn't surprise us. We Jews are taught repeatedly that we must care for the well-being, the material and spiritual needs of others. Kol Yisrael arevim zeh lazeh. All of Israel is responsible for one another. Both the short confessional Ashamnu and the long confessional, the list of al-Chetz, are recited in plural form, even when we recite it privately. Rabbi Reuven Hammer noted that we do this in keeping with the Jewish concept of communal responsibility. We confess not only things we may have done personally, but everything done by anyone within the community. Each person shares the responsibility for society as a whole. Rabbi Jeffrey Cohen adds the plural formulation suggests that it is society that fosters the climate and conditions wherein sin is engendered in the heart of the individual. An unfeeling society will nurture despair on the part of the disadvantaged. From despair flow crime and sin. An irresponsible society will similarly breed delinquency, violence, and sin. The plural formulation indicated that although the individual commits the act, society at large must bear the responsibility. Abraham Joshua Heschel expressed this idea in his essay, The Reasons for My Involvement in the Peace Movement. The main lessons of the prophets of ancient Israel, he wrote, sought to convey that morally speaking, there is no limit to the concern one must feel for the suffering of human beings. It became clear to me that in regard to the cruelties committed in the name of a free society, some are guilty while all are responsible. I did not feel guilty as an individual American for the bloodshed in Vietnam, but I felt deeply responsible. Thou shalt not stand idly by the blood of thy neighbor is not a recommendation, but an imperative. And so I decided to change my mode of living and to become active in the cause of peace in Vietnam. Heschel articulated a more expanded perception of the phrase, for indeed we and our ancestors have sinned. Not only were we in some sense liable for the wrongs of our ancestors, but for the society in which we live. In her recent book, Learning from the Germans, the philosopher Susan Neiman, born and raised as a Jew in the South, later an Israeli, and today living in Germany, did not quote Heschel in her book, yet her thesis is the same. She writes of the effort of second and third generation Germans after the Holocaust to force their parents, grandparents, and German society as a whole to confront its guilt for the Holocaust and the destruction it caused in World War II. The movement to work through the guilt and shame of their societal evil is called Vergangenheitsaufarbeitung, which means the process of coming to terms with the past. At first, German reaction to the end of World War II was, as one might expect, to not talk about it. If it was discussed at all, it was in the context of, we Germans were also victims. But later generations of Germans demanded an accounting for their ancestors' crimes. Some years ago, Neiman returned to the South, to Mississippi, to investigate how the U.S. was dealing with its own shameful history. What she found was that despite some attempts by black educators and white allies, the United States has done very little to confront our past. Someone once asked her, how did Germany deal after the war with their monuments to Nazi German leaders? She responded, there weren't any. Rather, their memorials are to the victims of Nazi terror. In addition, there are near ubiquitous small brass plaques called stumbling stones that lie before the houses in which Jews, gays, Roma, who were deported lived, with the names of these individuals, their dates of birth and deportation. Brian Stevenson, who founded the Equal Justice Initiative and whose story is told in the movie Just Mercy, was profoundly affected by the stumbling stones on a visit to Germany. Quote, they reminded me of the iconography of the Confederacy. You can't go anywhere in the South without running into some sign or some street or some name that is designed to remind people of this era, which they take great pride in, end quote. But the stumbling stones do the exact reverse. Instead of pride, they are designed to evoke shame. Vergangenheitsaufarbeitung in Germany was slow in coming. At first, post-war expression of Nazi sentiment was legally unacceptable. By the 1980s, they were socially unacceptable. And today, most Germans find them morally unacceptable. Neiman asks us to imagine how much spiritually healthier would we be in America if people were ashamed to hang the portraits of their Confederate ancestors in uniform or to cling to the statues that honor them, where the raw and brutal truth of slavery and racial terror were integrated into historical narratives of American exceptionalism. When she compares the two societies that she has lived in, German and American, in the 21st century, she finds Germany to be a much happier, diverse, and vibrant society than the United States. We in the United States have resisted confronting the sins of our national past, and thus the sores fester. Sometimes to do tshuva means opening up old wounds in order to allow for proper healing. My first pulpit was in Appleton, Wisconsin. It was a community of about 100 Jewish families, but only around 80 belonged to the synagogue because 15 years before I came, the community had a bitter fight. The solution to the bitter fight was to ignore it, especially because family members were on opposite sides. I spent the first 2 years of my pulpit there speaking to members and former members about the argument, hearing the bitterness from each side. But eventually, by talking it out and recognizing that a split in community this small does no one any good, the factions came together and let bygones be bygones. According to Rabbi Shalom Noah Berezovsky, known as the Slonim Rav, this is what the tshuva process demands. He writes, "A person's task in doing tshuva is comparable to a builder building a beautiful house on a pile of rubble. If one is not willing to invest the money and effort to dig out a deep and solid foundation, the building will not have a firm infrastructure, and therefore cracks will continue to appear in the walls of the house. And each time, one will have to again make great expenditures to strengthen the building. Nevertheless, it will accomplish nothing, for additional fissures will again appear, and the house will be in continual danger of collapse. There's only one path forward: to have the courage to demolish the whole structure of the house and dig deep and strong with strong foundations upon which a stronger house can be built and established. So too is tshuva. Even though every year a person introduces repairs and improvements in the structure of their spiritual house, when it's not built on a strong foundation, every year fissures and cracks will reopen, and one's spiritual home will be in danger of tottering. Only once a person arrives at a circumstance where he or she has courage and understands that all these improvements won't solve the problem of one's life, then will one dig deep foundations and dig out all the root of the gall and the wormwood, and then one can build a lasting house. The same is true for a society. Until we are able to go to the foundation and expose the rot that we keep covering up, the cracks and fissures will continue to undo whatever cosmetic repairs we attempt to make. As Americans, we resist taking into account the heinous sins of our past: genocide against indigenous peoples and enslavement of Black Americans. And because we do not, our society is stuck papering over fissures that keep reappearing. The repercussions of past injustice continue to reverberate in our society today. Black and indigenous communities have suffered a disproportionate number of deaths from the coronavirus because they are less likely to have sufficient health care and thus higher comorbidity rates. Black Americans are twice as likely to be out of work as white Americans, and 2 to 10 times as likely to be incarcerated depending on where they live. Yet we prefer to conclude that there's something wrong with Black society and cultural behavior, rather than acknowledge the overt and covert attempts to limit their opportunities for equal access to American prosperity. Now you may ask, why, Rabbi Friedland, are you hawking us, members of Sinai Synagogue, about this issue? What do we have to atone for? Neither we nor our ancestors owned slaves. We all agree that slavery was wrong. How are we liable for this American sin? Because those of us who came to America as immigrants willingly took on the benefits and the responsibilities of being citizens of the United States. And those of us who had the good fortune to have been born here benefited from the serendipity that our ancestors moved here and not to another location in Europe. Susan Neiman compares our situation to a case of familial inheritance. We accept the benefits along with the liabilities. It's not whether our family owned slaves or not, it is that we Jews, those of us with white skin, benefited from an unfairly distributed national inheritance. It's not about collective guilt or punishment, wrote the philosopher Thomas McCarthy. It is about collective responsibility and liability. Now, for a long time, I resisted this kind of thinking. I mean, we Jews have been subject to terrible prejudice and hate as well. My grandparents came to this country with the clothes on their backs. But there were still opportunities my ancestors had despite the bigotry. My uncle Sidney had to start his own law practice in the 1950s because no law firm would hire a lawyer whose last name was Goldstein. However, he was still able to get a low mortgage rate thanks to the GI Bill. Black GIs were systematically denied this. Black Americans were limited in such ways to climb up the economic prosperity ladder. Our nation is unique in that it was founded on ideals, not tribal ties. Even if our founders did not appreciate the fullness of those ideals in their day, it is those ideals that should be our measuring stick as to what kind of nation we seek to be. By acknowledging and expressing shame for failing to achieve those ideals, we begin the long, slow process of drawing closer to them. And isn't that what Yom Kippur is all about? First we acknowledge our wrongs, then we confess them. Once we can verbally admit the sin, we resolve to make good on those wrongs and commit ourselves to refraining from them in the future. The process begins with a clear apology for the past. After the Holocaust, many in Israel found the idea of accepting reparations to be noxious. The idea that Germany could gain pardon for its crimes through blood money almost brought Israel to civil war. But David Ben-Gurion, the prime minister, was more pragmatic. Israel needed funds to integrate the victims of the Holocaust and to build up the state. West Germany needed to re-enter the world stage. Meetings were arranged and the unseemly haggling over sums began. But first and foremost, Israel demanded an acknowledgement of guilt, which Chancellor Konrad Adenauer delivered in a formal statement to Parliament, admitting German culpability for crimes against the Jewish people. Our nation has never made a formal apology for its 246 years of enslavement of black people. In 2008, a resolution passed the House of Representatives, and in 2009, one passed the Senate. But it was not a joint declaration, and the Executive Office has never apologized. In the face of the 1988 formal apology and $20,000 restitution to Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II, this lack of contrition is even more striking. As far as restoring what was taken from Black Americans and indigenous peoples, I can only share a teaching from the Talmud. According to Jewish law, if someone steals something, the only way to do tshuva is to return that stolen item. Talmud brings a case where a person stole a wooden beam from another. He then built his house with the beam. Must he tear down his house in order to observe complete tshuva? The school of Shammai said, yes, tear down the house, because the actual item must be returned. But the law follows the school of Hillel, who argued, pay the value of the beam. It is impossible to reconstruct the past. We cannot undo the past 400 years, but there must be a way to perform some form of restitution. Many years ago, before my mother was born, my grandfather and his brother-in-law had a falling out. My grandfather had lent his brother-in-law money and was never paid back. But the past is murky, and each side told the story in a way that absolved their patriarch. Some 50 years later, my mother and her first cousin were sitting together at a family wedding when this story came up. Each side told the other what they understood to be the true story of the falling out. My mother said, look, the only way to get to the truth is to ask Aunt Esther. My great Aunt Esther was sharp as a tack well into her 80s. Aunt Esther was asked for her judgment, and she agreed with my mother's version. My grandfather had lent his brother-in-law $100, and he had never been paid back. Cousin Ben was aghast and apologized on behalf of his father. 2 weeks later, my mother received a dedication certificate from the Jewish National Fund for 100 trees planted in Israel in memory of my grandfather, Harry Rubenstein. We can't atone for the sins of our ancestors. We can atone for the sins of our society, because to be a Jew is to transcend the self, to look outward to care about the other. The ultimate goal of tshuva is not to save oneself. How is that not a selfish objective? The goal of tshuva is to become a better person in order to make the world a better place. Thus, in working towards tshuva, we are in a sense always accepting the burden of expunging not only our own sins, but the sins of others. Maimonides, the great philosopher, made this exceptionally clear in his teaching of tshuva. Every individual must assess himself or herself throughout the year as if they were balanced exactly between innocence and guilt. And so too the world, exactly balanced between innocence and guilt. One additional sin tilts the individual and the world towards guilt and ultimately destruction. One additional mitzvah or good deed leads the individual towards acquittal and brings deliverance and salvation to the world. We acknowledge at this time of year that we nor our ancestors nor our society are neither so arrogant nor so stubborn as to claim in your presence, O Lord, that we are righteous and have not sinned. For indeed, we and our ancestors and our society have sinned. But you, O Lord, have given us the wherewithal to begin the process of bringing tshuva and liberation and salvation to ourselves, our ancestors, and our society. Let us begin that process today. Shana Tova.